Tony D with a video, a screenwriter's tips video. And I think I may have touched on this subject before, but I was reminded of it again. I don't have a background for this, so I'm just posting that. You know what reminded me of it? Was writing comics over at the Web Comic Factory. In fact, writing this one. And, when you write comics, you have to work small. You only got, in this case, 3 panels to tell a story or joke, and so you really gotta tighten things up. And I feel that it's a good exercise for people to write comic strips, especially if you're very wordy, because it really forces you to get to the point, and that's what a lot of writers I think suffer from. So today's tip is to work small. And what I mean by working small is not only small in format, but small in subject matter. Another thing that I have to do with this particular strip, which is Tales of Pizza, is it's just about a guy who delivers pizza. So I have to keep the stories somehow connected to that at all costs. At all costs. I can't have him get a better job. That would be crazy. Like, oh yeah, it's Tales of Pizza. Oh, but now he works in an office and he's got 2 kids. No, that can't work. It doesn't make any sense that they'd be called Tales of Pizza and now he works in an office and hasn't delivered pizzas in 5 years. Like, why are you calling it Tales of Pizza then? I'm reminded also, too, speaking of pizza, there was a comic strip called, I don't know if you ever read it. This is really dating me, but it was called Funky Winkerbean. I know. It was like a 70s sort of comic strip back in the day when newspapers were still a thing. But it followed a group of high schoolers, and then eventually he aged all the characters. And eventually the kid who was delivering pizzas eventually became a pizza guy. But then it got into a story. It was no longer really a comedy. It was kind of a story about a kid. He grows up, he's delivering pizzas, he gets married, he has a kid, and then he has, I don't know who had the medical problem. I can't think if it was his wife or his kid, but then it became really sad. Like, and the weird thing was too, he seemed to keep inserting crazy characters from the old days, but now they were kind of like pathetic. So there were jokes about a kid in a marching band and other jokes like that, and then they would show up, and I'd just be like, God, this used to be kind of a fun strip, and now it's so maudlin. Thus the danger, I guess, of working on something too long. But working small forces you to get to the meat of the issue, and to get into what the hell the story's about. And in this, I use the 3 act structure for almost everything. This is the 3 act structure, 1, 2, 3 panels. So some of it I kind of have to shortcut, and that for Tales of Pizza I use the narration. See, this sort of sets up the first act. Got to the door and the dude was wearing a mask. Who's wearing a mask these days? So it instantly tells you, between the visuals and that setup, he's delivering a pizza and he just opened the door and the guy's got a mask on. So it kind of gives me almost like a 4th panel. And then the second act is you're beefing up the mask. I can't understand you with the mask on. And he's talking with the mask. And then the joke is he walks all the way back so he could take off the mask, and now he can't hear him talk. Wah, wah, wah. I know, that's a bit of a wah wah. I thought it was funny. I mean, sometimes you just want a simple joke. It's only 3 panels. But as you know, a few strips ago, if you've been following this, Mitch, the main character, took over the pizza. Well, he has his own pizza parlor now. And what happened was, in order to make it happen quickly, not just, in terms of the 3-panel strip, but in terms of, you know, moving the story forward, it happened very quickly because, let's see, I get to the strip here. Mitch, here it is, won the lottery. So he wins the lottery, gets married, and buys his old pizza place, Catio's. He used to work there. And now his girlfriend's pregnant, and now he's going to have a business. Now, this all happened. The previous strip, you can go back here. He was working, and he showed up, and his place was closed. He lost his job. He bought the lottery ticket in this panel, and then the place was closed, and then boom, he won the lottery. And then boom, oh, sorry, I hit the wrong one. Yeah, and here he is working in the previous one. But then he buys a lottery ticket here. He wins the lottery in the last panel. Then the next thing you get, the results of that, now we're in a completely different dynamic. Now we're in a dynamic where Mitch is the boss, and he's run the show at the pizza parlor. And this is the growing pains of getting the place open. He finally has money, and now I actually don't know what to do with Mumar and Lincoln, who were two of the other drivers, and the other one, they'll probably be back in something, but I don't know. I don't know. They're pretty mad. But this is the new dynamic. Now Mitch is the boss. You'll remember Pietro. Mitch used to work for Pietro when he had a pizza place, and he was the driver. Now Mitch has got his own place, and he hires Pietro because he's his friend, and Pietro is the cook. And his pizza's not that great. But good enough, because everybody loves pizza. And anyhow, working small, there's a lot of detail, which is why I'm telling you all this. There's a lot of detail in working small, because I have to get into the nitty gritty of Mitch working at a pizza place, starting his own business, his now wife. I have the advantage here. We've done 500 strips just with Vig, the artist here, the main artist, of course, for the Tales of Pizza. There was a guy who did a handful of strips in the beginning, and then another guy, I think, did like 5 or 6 strips, and then Vig's been on it ever since. And because I've worked small on this, there's not a lot to tell you in terms of Mitch. I can still, after all this time, and it's been years, it's 500 strips. It's been like 10 years of doing this strip. So over 10 years, Mitch has worked first he worked for Catio's, then he worked for Pietro's, and then he worked for, actually in between there, I think there was another place, or they got new uniforms, I forget. And then he worked for Pizza Land. Well, actually it was Pizza Corp. Then it became Pizza Land, and now it's Pepper's Pizza. So one of the things I've been meaning to do is put up Mitch's resume, which I think would be fun to have on the site with all the places he worked at. And then the cool thing would be to have links to all the places he, in the comic where he started. But and it's given a great opportunity, because of all this detail, for Vig to redesign the uniforms. So this is the current uniform for Pepper's Pizza. It's just, a shirt with a logo on it, because, Mitch is finally in charge. And the running gag in the strip, for those of you who don't know, was that usually he had a terrible uniform. Pizza Land was kind of the peak of that. Like, Pizza Land had the worst uniform ever. And that was the idea. That was just so humiliating to even wear it. And that was partly the inspiration for it. I know I'm talking about Tales of Pizza, but the lesson is working small. Because I'm working small, I have to put in all these details. And as we say in writing, the devil's in the details, and that's what you want to do with your screenplays or novels or whatever. You want detail. So even if you don't do a comic strip, per se, you might consider just writing one as an exercise. 3 panels, that's all you can put. They got to make sense. The 3 panels have to make sense on their own. There has to be a bit of a story there or a joke, depending on the genre you're working in. And then you go to the next strip, and they must be readable as individuals. You can have continued in next strip or whatever, but I try to make that very, very rare. That's happened maybe 5 or 6 times during the course of 10 years on this strip. So stay away from that as an exercise. Don't do it at all. But make sure you have enough in the strip. And the way you do that is you really have to strip away all the extraneous noise and get to the heart of your joke, your story, and your characters. And that's what you need to remember when you're doing a longer piece. Because I think a lot of rookie writers will go on and on and on, especially in novels, because they think somehow a lot of words is good. More is not necessarily better, especially in a story, especially in dialogue, in a screenplay. You don't need a lot of dialogue. You don't need a lot of anything unless you need a lot of it for some specific reason. In the case of, they've got this new show, Bad Monkey, with Vince Vaughn. Vince Vaughn plays like a Vince Vaughn type character, neurotic, blah, 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 constantly babbling. That's a character you want to have a lot of dialogue. But like almost too much, But most characters, no. You want, because that's the way people talk. That's the way people interact. And by keeping the dialogue and the details to the minimum, or focusing on particular things, you are building on your story, your core story. When you put a bunch of extraneous nonsense on, you can distract people. They don't know what your core story is, especially when it first starts. There's a few things you can do that I did in the Pineys, actually, in the first book, that I could not do now that I just started book 17 last night. I can't do certain things in book 17. It won't be a surprise at all. We already know the characters. We already know the setting. Now I'm going past that. So there are a handful of things you can do, but that's kind of high wire stuff. You don't want to necessarily, come out the gate with that, especially if you're just starting out and you're not writing a lot. Especially if you're having a lot of trouble writing. I talk to writers all the time. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to write, or I'm stuck, or I'm having writer's block. How do I get rid of it? This is one of the ways to do it. Force yourself to dig deep in a very simple concept, and you will hopefully find creative ways in order to make it interesting. And you might say delivering pizza is not very interesting. As a concept, I actually think it's kind of interesting to me, because not a lot of people focus on pizza delivery guys, especially in entertainment. I think this would make a great cartoon or a series. I think 100% this would translate immediately into a great sitcom. It's a little tougher to shoot than most. I'm not exactly sure how we shoot it, because it requires a lot of locations, but for a very short time. I think you could shoot this show fairly cheaply with the right actors. It wouldn't require, well, you kind of need a lot of actors, but again, for a short time. So, it really forced me to dig deep in the small amount of area that I could work in. And I think that really helps you. And then when you expand into a novel or a screenplay, you realize that although you have the world to travel into, you want to keep your focus, because in the case of the Pineys are all about South Jersey. And although we've done crazy stories that have impacted all kinds of crazy things. I don't want to give away anything. Um, at heart, it's always about South Jersey with the Pineys. It's always about the Pine Barrens. It's always about something that's back in history and something about and that's at the core of the Pineys. And because of that, you can always rely on it when you read it that I'm always going to do something about South Jersey. And even if you're not from South Jersey, you can sort of stack the various clues together and kind of get a sense of it, and that helps. That helps with your writing. Now, if you're not going to do multiple books or multiple comics or whatever, in the screenplay sense, you need to stay focused. And a lot of people can't do this. A lot of screenwriters can't do this. You got to stay focused those 90 pages to get from beginning to end to the story. And the focus on something small, building on it, but keeping it within a certain realm. So, for instance, if you're writing a horror movie and it takes place in a house, and the whole movie's trapped in the house kind of thing, that is something that often happens in screenplays that you can really, it will force you to hopefully expand the characters and do things in the screenplay that maybe you wouldn't otherwise do if you had an unlimited budget and could go anywhere. So anyhow, that's the lesson for today. Work small. And that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check us out today, if you're not there already, at the Shoreline Vintage Show from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Richland, New Jersey. I'll be there until about 3, I guess, or until it gets too hot or the food truck leaves. That's it. We'll see you in the next one.